One of our greatest but unconscious powers is the power of thought. And we may not realize that. But this is the basis of our awareness, colored with emotions, of course. But there is ignorance of its consequences. And that's one of the things that we'll cover in today's program. We know nothing of the hidden effects of mere thinking. Isn't that the way we think of it? We merely think. What's, who cares? Our thoughts are private. They have no effect on anybody else. We'll see. Today we explore the basic ideas behind thought forms, egregores, and magic. And these three tie into one another. Our thought forms eventually can create egregores. Us, we. And through that, those that might be termed magicians or adepts can use these egregores through what might be termed magic. And we'll explore that as well. Theosophy teaches thoughts are real entities. Our thoughts are real entities with tenacity, coherence, and they are resistant to dissolution. That is similar to dying. The resistance to breaking down and falling apart. It's important that we understand the basic outline of the unconscious power we have, either for good or bad. And throughout the research that I did, they called bad evil. But generally we speak of it as bad. That's bad. But it can be quite evil. In a quote from the Mahatma Letters to AP Senate, the Mahatma KH states, and I'll read this: "Every thought of man, upon being fully developed, passes into the inner world and becomes an active entity by coalescing with an elemental. It survives as an active intelligence, a creature of the mind's begetting, creation, for a longer or shorter period, proportionate with the original intensity," and this is important, the original intensity of the thought. They call it of the cerebral action which generated it. Furthermore, man is continually peopling, and I love this phrase, and you picture yourself, is continually peopling his personal atmosphere, in other words, his aura, with a world of his own, crowded with the offspring of his fancies, our fancies, desires, our desires, impulses, our impulses, and our passions. A current which reacts upon any sensitive or nervous individual which comes in contact with it. In other words, some people who are sensitive, who consider themselves empaths, can feel exactly what a negative thought form feels like, or a compassionate thought form feels like. It can actually affect them, and they can talk about it. And to restate, our positive ideas generate benevolent forces, while our negative thoughts, if strong and repeated often enough, create destructive entities, sometimes referred to as demons. We read in books on ancient sorcery, that type of thing, in the astral realm. What do thought forms look like? In the book titled Thought Forms, A Record of Clairvoyant Investigations by Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater, and most of us are familiar with that, a series of common thought forms are depicted. The book provides a good, basic understanding of what is meant when we speak of thought forms. And this is a good starting point if you really haven't studied them or looked into it, done any research on it. And the next slide is, next 3 slides actually will discuss this. The first slide speaks of ambition and anger. What does it look like? These are some ideas as to what they look like. Ambition, and usually when it's ego-oriented, when it's egotistical and selfish, you see these little hooks that hooks back on the person who is thinking these things. And that's common. So ambition has the hooks on it, selfish, and selfish ambition, if it's great, looks like this one. And then explosive anger. My husband has been affected many times by explosive anger, by my explosive anger. I have to admit. Then we look at religious devotion. And this is an important one because most of our thoughts are vague. Most of our thoughts are cloud-like. And here we're speaking of vague religious feeling. And next to that is a firmer, well-developed thought form of an upper rush of devotion. If we are devoted to, let's say, a religious figure, and we live our lives by, let's use the example of Jesus Christ, for instance, or the Buddha, or any figure similarly, and we live our lives through that devotion. This is what the thought form would look like. And if we develop ourselves further, there exists in our aura this thought form that represents self-renunciation. And we hear that all the time, self-renunciation. And is perhaps one of the last steps on our journey along the path before we be of service, real service to humanity. We must learn to renounce the self. When we reach that stage, beautiful thought form. And then when we have this upper rush of devotion, this one refers to a response from the higher realm, from the higher spiritual realm, from the higher divine realm. And this last slide is the results of love. And again, vague, cloud-like. If we just have a general loving feeling. It's not well formed, but it's there. It's in our aura. It has its effect, but it's not definite. Can be easily disrupted. The other is radiating affection. If we radiate affection for another, this is what we're doing. This is the thought form that develops. The one on the bottom is a thought form that's developed when we meditate and send out radiation for peace and protection, but of others. And that's what the wings refer to. We're sending it out. It's flying outward. So if you meditate, say, for peace, for health of others, not for ourselves, but this can be the thought form that is developed that flies outward to help people. And another nature of this is not just that it is a thought form, but eventually we'll see how this type of thing develops into an egregore. In Annie Besant and Leadbeater's book, Thought Forms, as a result of clairvoyant investigation, these drawings and many more are in there. And I've only selected a few, but there are many more. And it's worth looking at this book to see a deeper explanation, a broader explanation that helps us to understand exactly what a thought form is. And I think that that particular book is a premier book, is really one worthwhile studying if one wants to understand ourselves and how we think. How thought forms are created. Thought forms generated in and of astral and lower manas, or manasic matter, is known as kama manas, a blend of desire and will, setting up vibrations that carry the thought's quality. Quality? What does that mean? It means calmness, maybe? Anger, which can influence not only our moods, but the moods of others. If definite, a thought form can embody a specific image or an idea depending upon the strength or the weakness of the will and the desire that created it. Definite means a thought that is clear, strong, mental, emotional, or a combination of both. A relatively strong desire combined with will. A strong thought can create an image of the thinker, and the thinker can project an astral double of their self to a distant space. Other times, a strong thought mimics a material object or may form an abstract shape expressing the thought's quality. And this is important to understand too, because the quality of a thought makes a huge difference. Is it a good quality or a bad quality? Does it even make a difference? Could it even be an evil thought? An unethical thought? These are qualities of thought forms, and we have to understand the nature of these things if we are to understand how we work in this world, how we live in this world. For example, a flash of anger or a rose-colored cloud of affection often displays colors reflecting the emotion behind the thought. And that's what they talk about frequently. It's not just a mental projection, it's also an emotional projection, filled with desire, what we want, what we need. Not just an unemotional thought, but there is that. Thought forms are usually built from the substance of our own mental and astral bodies, hovering in our aura. A powerful thought, especially one fueled by strong emotion, can detach and even travel. And sometimes we can see this even in our own lives, particularly when we are on the verge of waking up in the morning. We sometimes experience astral travel, or we sometimes experience someone visiting us, someone we love, someone who's just passed away, and they had a thought, strong thought at the moment of death to visit a child or to visit a parent. And we see these images, a projection of thought. Again, as they say, we are constantly peopling our stream of thought with thought forms, even now this minute. If we are thinking, we are creating thought forms. Some are vague, some are strong. Some are results of instinct, of habit. And when they're of continued instinct and habit, they can be very strong. And perhaps that's why we need another pair of shoes, if I may say so. They collect in our aura, creating the psychic atmosphere around us. It's always with us. And sometimes we can get a feeling about other people. And that feeling is the makeup of their aura and the results of their thought processes, the qualities of their thoughts. That atmosphere again reacts on any sensitive or nervous being which comes into contact with us, even plants and animals. Our thoughts, our thought forms can affect plants and can affect our pets. In simple terms, those who are intuitive or empathetic, again, can sense and be influenced by the thought vibrations we radiate. On the astral plane, like attracts like. Elementals who exist there tend to be attracted toward other elementals of a similar kind. And this is for you. Elementals are defined as nature spirits or beings that inhabit the astral plane, a realm of emotional energy and consciousness, and often associated with the spirit world. And if we understand the concept of involution, of the spirit into matter, and of evolution, spirit back to its source, we place an elemental on the downward into matter side of this total evolutionary spectrum. And it's kind of like a raw, unconscious almost, has no real awareness of what is happening, and doesn't become individualized until the human kingdom, if this rings a bell. But they exist there in the astral world and will eventually enter what we call the material physical world and have concrete beingness, so to speak. In families, communities, and nations, shared thoughts and emotions blend into a collective thought form. A collective thought form. There is a collective thought form for this lodge. The members create this. It is an atmosphere, and I may say a welcoming atmosphere, and you can be proud of that. These group thought clouds create an astral atmosphere through which everything is seen. It's like looking through rose-colored glasses, so to speak. It's colored in a certain direction. And that color has either a mental type of coloring, an emotional type of coloring, or a combination of both. But these are the strong thought forms of the group as a whole. And not just this group, again, our families, our city, our town, the nation. And I believe, although I haven't seen it, I believe the entire world has its own group, egregore, so to speak, and I'd like to see that one. Philosophers debate whether thought forms have their own consciousness. Their own consciousness. H.P. Blavatsky explained that a normal thought form is not truly conscious. No. It is perfectly unconscious unless it is the creation of an adept who has preconceived object in giving it consciousness. And we'll go into that just a little bit more. Most of our thoughts create automatic astral entities that blindly, and this is very important, that blindly carry out the single task or emotion we instilled in them. Not consciously, but unconsciously. We aren't aware of what we're doing as a group on that level. But we're instilling a certain path for this egregore, a certain type of life or living for this egregore, for the group egregores. And there are many of them. We're not just affected by our family egregore, so to speak, or our nation, but any group that we belong to. We're affected by it in some way or another. They appear to have a life of their own, but it's really our mental energy at work, our will. Well, let me get back to Annie Besant and Leadbeater. They likewise noted that a vigorous thought form can become for a time a kind of independent living being, not by conscious action, but by a blind following out of the impulse given to it by the members of its group that it is attached to. So in a way, we unconsciously direct the growth of an egregore, this group thought form. And adepts, by instilling a portion of their will and their intellect, can create an entity that behaves as if it were conscious. It is how an adept can appear in two places at once, by sending a thought form or astral double of themselves that can interact intelligently. Such cases are exceptional. The adept essentially loans part of his consciousness to form. In Tibetan Buddhism, for example, practitioners speak of tulpa, and a tulpa is a phantom form, similar to what we've been discussing as egregores, produced through intense concentration, and usually it is on purpose. It is intentional. There was a story that I read about the explorer Alexandra David Neal, N-E-E-L. She reportedly generated a tulpa of a friendly monk, which others allegedly saw. Over time, it developed a will of its own and became troublesome, requiring her to reabsorb it or deconstruct it. Stories like this suggest, under rare circumstances, a thought form might attain a degree of autonomy, especially if sustained by ritual or intense belief, a concept that bridges into the idea of egregores. The definition of an egregore is that it is a concept in esotericism, referring to a thought form that arises from the collective thoughts and emotions of a group of like-minded individuals. It is essentially a group mind, or collective consciousness that takes on a life of its own. Egregores are formed by the shared beliefs, and this is an important concept, by the shared beliefs, emotions, intentions, and even by group religious worship. They are not necessarily evil, but they can be. And they are not intentionally created to take action, but they still have an influence. A few examples are Santa Claus, Uncle Sam, the devil. How many people believe in the devil? And the collective consciousness of a nation. What is that like? An egregore of America. What would that be like? Of a religion. All the thoughts of the congregations of a particular religion throughout the world. What is that egregore like? And then each church would have its own egregore. Or even an organization. Egregores influence the thoughts and actions of individuals within a group and can be conduits for non-human psychic intelligences or astral entities. And these, I didn't find much information on non-human psychic intelligences. Egregores arise from the combined, I'll say this again, by the combined thoughts, emotions, and mental energies of many people. And by many, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I think if you have a little group, there's a little egregore involved in that. You get along well, you work together well, and even in your own office where you work, if you're still working, there's this little egregore. Is it a good one? Is it a nagging one? I mean, is there conflict amongst you? Or do you get along and work well with one another? A thought form, an egregore, develops around these thoughts that you have when you work together as a group. This egregoric entity can gain a degree of autonomy and influence over the group that sustains it. Because every time you think in that atmosphere, you are strengthening or supporting that egregore, that group egregore. Examples And I mention this again, but it's important to understand that we're being conditioned along so many lines. There's so many groups and influences that we have. There's the family. There's the city. There's the nation. And it affects our role in the world. And we don't realize exactly what is going on as far as that conditioning goes. The egregore embodies shared attitudes and goals of any particular group that created it. Egregores a distinct presence on the egregores behave like a distinct presence on the astral plane, powered by a group's repeated thoughts and feelings. And more often, if it's similar feelings, the egregore grows in strength and feeds on the emotions and thoughts of the individuals within that group. And as it does that, it can outlive any single member and take on a life of its own within that particular domain. It subtly influences the group's members, reinforcing the shared thoughts or moods. Even after the original group, if it has people coming into it over and over again, sustains it. And this is really described as an accumulation that can keep up a certain magnetic link with its contributors and can exert a certain collective pressure for better or for worse, depending upon the nature of the group's thought. Early theosophical insights, and we've all run across the idea of thought forms, but they've never been attached to the word egregore. But if you understand the definition of an egregore, and you go back and reread these from that perspective, you'll see that they are speaking about egregores. And it's the more you study the thought forms that we generate, the more obvious it is that that's what they were referring. Early theosophical teachings acknowledged the egregore principle without explicitly using the term. This said, Blavatsky used the word in The Secret Doctrine, in stanza 1, and in the Theosophical Glossary describing how identical thoughts attract and aggregate. Thought forms not only stay linked to its source, and what is its source? Me, you, but is drawn towards other thought forms of a similar type, combining with them. These congregate together on the astral plane, forming a good or evil force that coalesces or forms into a kind of collective entity. Uplifting clusters of thought may form an angelic-like egregore. Hateful, violent thoughts form a malignant, demon-like entity in the astral substance and creates a tangible group aura or astral climate which members of that group live. The characteristics of family, local, and national opinion is a part of this. A kind of astral atmosphere through which everything is seen and influences or colors our perception. An individual born into a nation or joining any group finds their thinking subtly shaped by this pre-existing mental atmosphere. These collective thought entities are karmic products of the group's history and can strongly influence individual behavior. For example, a normally peaceful person is in a frenzied mob may feel swept up by what is essentially the mob's egregore. An egregore is essentially a composite brain, I think I briefly mentioned that, made of many unified thoughts. It operates mechanically to perpetuate the ideas and motion and emotions that formed it. It will push members towards certain actions or feelings, not by reasoned intent, but by the momentum of collective habit. However, if an egregore happens to be aligned with lofty spiritual ideals, it can act as a channel for genuine, higher inspiration as members tap into the uplifting group soul, so to speak. An immoral egregore can become a conduit for chaotic or destructive forces. Theosophy sees no sharp dividing line between a powerful thought form and an egregore. I'm moving on to segment 3, which is where we speak a little bit about magic. And this is important because there's unconscious magic in the world. And we don't realize that we're approaching that line. And I want you to understand just what this means. In Theosophy, magic is the application of spiritual or psychic forces. And whether or not it is white or black depends entirely on the motive and purpose. As HPB stressed, the infinite use and applications of spiritual force with a selfish or material aim is black magic. Selfishness is black magic, whereas using such power solely for the blessing and benefit of others is white. In short, selfish equals black as a motive, and selfless equals white as your motive. This sharp ethical line is the core distinctions throughout occult philosophy. Selfish or unselfish motive in what we do and in what we think. White magic is performed with altruistic intent, in harmony with divine law and compassion. The white magician seeks to serve, to heal, to uplift, and never for personal gain. Their work is often subtle and invisible. Examples include prayer, energy healing, blessing, or guiding others spiritually, all done without ego. In theosophical terms, true white magic requires purity of heart, self-discipline, and humility. It aligns the practitioner with higher spiritual beings such as the masters, angelic hosts, and archangels, for examples, and all the forces of light. Black magic, on the other hand, is any attempt to manipulate occult forces for selfish, insidious ends or ill intent. This ranges from harmful sorcery and curses to more insidious forms of, like using psychic powers for dominance, for greed, or for vanity. Many popular manifestation practices, it is said, border on black magic if done selfishly. For example, using visualization or the law of attraction, and we've heard about this in many places in today's world, on social media particularly. To gain like personal wealth or success violates the selflessness principle. Blavatsky wrote that attempting such as occult shortcuts for material gain is, to quote her, black magic and spiritual sorcery. No matter how harmless it seems, the karmic cost of black magic is grave. We tie ourselves to lower forces and accumulate heavy karma. Western occultists not only acknowledge egregores, They often deliberately create and work with them. Magical orders and fraternities such as Masonic lodges, the Rosicrucian Order Amorc, for example, perform group rituals with concentrated symbols and visualizations specifically to build a potent group thought form that protects, guides, and energizes its members. Over time, this group spirit becomes a reservoir of psychic power that members can draw upon. Successful occult groups are said to have an egregore that survives beyond the group's founders, taking on a legacy of its own. Occult literature suggests that many deities and the archetypal beings humanity worships are sustained, at least in part, by egregorial power. When generations of devotees pour forth faith and emotion into a divine form, a mighty thought form develops around that image. Generally, any symbolic pattern that has served as a focus for human emotion will build up an egregore of its own over time. The gods and goddesses of every religion, past and present, are at the centers of vast egregores charged with specific kinds of power. HPB mentions in the Theosophical Glossary that egregores, as beings whose bodies and essence are a tissue of the so-called astral light, are the shadows of the higher planetary spirits, whose bodies themselves are of the essence of the higher or highest divine light. Even a true spiritual being is surrounded by the thought emanations of worshipers, which can intensify miracles or even answer a prayer more effectively even. On a more mundane level, a corporation's logo, and this is important too, we are being conditioned by corporations, whether we realize it or not. A corporation's logo or a nation's flag can become an egregoric symbol, accumulating emotional energy from all who rally around it. Some Orientalists see egregores as neutral constructs, simply amplifying what is fed to them, even if unconscious, but for good or bad ends. Other occult thinkers issue warnings. The esotericist Valentin Tomberg, a Roman Catholic by the way, insisted all egregores are inherently dangerous and associated egregores with the devil archetype, an artificial being that enslaves its creators, saying that whenever people surrender their will to a group mind, they risk being bound by an entity of their own making. The occult author Mauni Sadhu took a more modern stance, stating egregores can be either good or bad depending upon the creator's intentions. We've already heard that. A noble egregore of compassion versus a malevolent egregore of hatred. Consider too how a centuries-old cathedral, this is just an example, how a centuries-old cathedral filled with prayer and devotion accumulates a sacred egregore of peace, a combined aura of all the worshippers and rites performed there. A modern example, the collective intent on social media, a dedicated fan community for a celebrity can generate an egregore of adulation, or in negative cases, a toxic egregore in a hate group forum. Theosophical and occult teachings emphasize the need for conscious awareness and ethical responsibility. This is what the society is all about. This is what Theosophy is all about. Ethical responsibility. Understanding who we are. Understanding our place in the universe. Understanding everything as best we can. But taking ethical responsibility along the way. Every group one joins has an egregore, a group soul or atmosphere. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately been hit with a sense of something very subtle? The test of a person of strong character is to be aware of the presence of an egregore. In practice, this means a wise individual remains somewhat detached and observant in groups, but participating in the uplifting aspects of a group mind, but resisting blindly following any collective negativity. If an egregore is harmful, one can oppose it by withholding one's energy from it, effectively starving it, transforming its energy through positive action, or in a spiritual context, invoking higher forces to disperse it. Ultimately, understanding egregores teaches us that unity of thought is power, and that we must use that power conscientiously. The white magician employs thought forms and spiritual will to heal and help others. In essence, prayer and goodwill visualizations are forms of white magic. Theosophist C.W. Leadbeater noted that concentrated thoughts of goodwill can envelop a target and arouse feelings and thoughts of similar nature in them. This is the basis of metaphysical healing and blessing rituals in many traditions. Altruistic thought can manifest as a shielding entity. This shielding and protective agent, as an egregore, its duty is to opportunistically guard and strengthen a group's subtle defenses, to strengthen it, but without independent mind. Many practitioners of white magic consciously create protective circles or guardian thought forms around homes, temples, or loved ones, often visualizing angels or divine light to ward off harm. Visualization such as this often involves invocation, calling on a deity, angel, or master to infuse the work with protective energy. Magic is done in cooperation with one's higher self or divine will. The magician acts as a channel for goodness. Any thought forms or egregores created are consecrated to serve universal good, not personal agendas. This way, the work accrues positive karma and avoids the ego traps of magic. Now, black magic practitioners deliberately create negative thought forms to harm, to control, or to manipulate. Intensely hate-filled thoughts can coalesce into actual attacking entities on the astral plane. For example, a sorcerer focusing malevolence on an enemy might generate a fierce thought form, an astral knife, so to speak, or a demonic shape, and launch it at the victim's aura to cause injury or illness. In occult terms, this is manufacturing an artificial elemental programmed to do harm. Leadbeater wrote that skilled Atlantean black magicians were capable of making artificial elementals of extreme virulence and power. These are essentially psychic weapons, vicious, vampire-like beings that live only to carry out their creator's dark intent. Many traditional forms of black magic, such as curses, evil eye, voodoo, operate via destructive thought forms. The practitioner might use a ritual prop like an image of the target to concentrate hatred or fear, which empowers the thought form and links it to the target. The astral light, to use Eliphas Levi's term, becomes charged with a destructive image that seeks to manifest in the target's life. If the target's own will force is weak or their vitality is low, the implanted thought form can precipitate misfortunes or obsess the person's mind. However, if the target is protected by their own positive aura or another's help, these attacks can rebound on the sender, a known peril of black magic. Black magicians may also harness group evil. A cult leader, for instance, might deliberately foster an egregore of fanatical loyalty or fear among his followers to hold them under sway. Such an egregore essentially enslaves a group's will, a smaller scale version of what Tom Berg warned, the devil-like egregore that makes creators into slaves. In modern times, propagandists and demagogues, even if not the cultists per se, can unintentionally create powerful negative egregores. The eventual spiritual consequence is terrible. The black magician becomes spiritually bound by the very forces he or she unleashed, as those parasitic thought forms cling to their maker and drag them down. We live in a universe of unsuspected power and potential, and we are an integral part of it. Our potential as individuals and as spiritual beings is immeasurable. And the more we jump into Theosophy and read this and take it to heart and actually attempt to live it in our lives, the truer that is. Let us try to comprehend the depth and breadth of what lies ahead of us as human beings. Not only can we transform ourselves, but with courage and with fortitude, we can change the world. Thank you. And I'm sorry for running over.